Tim is the chair of the Presto Technical Steering Committee. He works closely with other Presto Foundation members to determine the Presto technical roadmap, and he is going to be talking about what's coming up. So Tim, please, here you go. Take it away.
Thank you.
We're going to sign this.
I think it's working. Thanks, Ali and Girish. Tons of great context there, and I'm also really excited to see so many faces here. It's really great to see everyone here in person. I think it's like our first in-person event in several years. So I mean, this is to me it's really awesome. So I'm pretty excited. I'll just introduce myself real quick. I'm Tim Meehan. I am the software engineer at Meta and also the Technical Steering Committee chair for the Presto Foundation. So the Technical Steering Committee sort of is the committee who sort of like attempts to guide the direction of the project, resolve disputes, and sort of facilitate technical discussions. We'll be talking about the TSC meetings later in the slides, but let's begin. I think before we kind of go in depth, I wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit more around what Presto is all about. And to me, I think sort of a large part of what Presto is about is openness. So firstly, everyone knows Presto is open source. So the source code is available on GitHub. You can download it. It's all sort of has open source licenses, so you're free to modify it however you see fit. But it's, and this is foundational for Presto. That'll never change. But it's not just sort of open, source in terms of just the source code, right? A large part of, what it is also the governance. And what this means is, clear paths for contributions, clear, sort of open paths for governance, as Girish mentioned, and, this being available to anyone who wants to participate. So, openness in terms of just the source code and then how changes are added into the source code, super important and foundational to what Presto is. So that's, sort of one aspect of the openness of Presto. But it's not just sort of openness in terms of the code and how the code is modified. It's also open in terms of, sort of how you want to use Presto. So, obviously the connector API plays a huge role in Presto's openness. Presto is agnostic to how you structure your data center, what sort of scheme that you use or what technology you use to store the data. And so thanks in large part to the connector API and the, sort of design of Presto, openness in terms of, how you want to, sort of how your data warehouse is structured is also a very key part of Presto, and it's, sort of integral to the project. It's very sort of agnostic, and, it's up to you how you know best how to structure it. But it's not just sort of open in terms of, how your warehouse is structured. It's also open in terms of how you want to use it. So, a large part is, Presto supports an extremely flexible anti-SQL standard compliant way of querying. So, this flexibility in terms of how many stages you can use, joins, aggregations, how you want to, sort of bridge relations together, also extremely important. So Presto is, tries to be as open as possible and allows, sort of as flexible ways of querying your data as possible. And then finally, there's this openness in terms of what language you use to query Presto. And so here also, the openness is extremely important. We unify on the ANSI-SQL spec. So, we don't impose, sort of a proprietary language. If you know Postgres or, sort of other ANSI-SQL compliant, systems, Presto. And so we don't really sort of impose a particular language just to use Presto. We use standard ANSI-SQL. So the openness is sort of really important to the project, and to me it's kind of the major theme of Presto. So the question is, what do we want to improve on? And going forward, especially in 2023, what do we want to do better? And how do we want to make this an even better project, increase the velocity, and make it an even better product that people love? And so to me, it all revolves around making all these things better, all the things that I describe better, and I describe this as one Presto. So let me explain. We have a single unifying language for large batch workload. Think, sort of like large Spark jobs, which is the same as what you would use for ad hoc SQL queries, so like data exploration, data science types of queries, which is also the same as the SQL that you use for business intelligence and fast online analytics. So the single language for batch and interactive, sort of like is, I think an extremely important direction. So let me go into this, in particular on the batch side. We are able to scale using Spark's distributed execution layer to really truly enormous sizes now. And so using this single language for, this wide spectrum of use cases is extremely important. And the reason is we don't want our data engineers to have to use a different tool based on things that seem outside of their control. So what I mean by this is, I call this replatforming. And this replatforming is expensive. It means that data engineers may have to drop whatever they're doing and perform potentially dangerous rewrites to move from one system to another to get their pipelines back on track. So we want to have a single experience for data engineers and data scientists that avoids this replatforming so that they use one single tool to do the data exploration, come up with ideas for how to structure these queries, and then seamlessly move that into production in a pipeline, and then go to bed with the peace of mind that this is going to be stable going forward. So we want to sort of avoid this replatforming in the middle, at unexpected times, essentially. And so that's why we want this single language for batch in all of interactive. So currently, one common setup is to use Spark for batch and Presto for interactive, and you may even use Presto for some of your batch workloads because it's more, it tends to be give you much better performance. But what we provide here is the proven scalability and predictability of Spark, and ideally the best of both worlds, and the peace of mind that data engineers won't be woken up in the middle of the night when some characteristic of your data changes from underneath you. So. And then likewise, thanks to our extensive multi-level caching efforts called RaptorX, which we've talked about kind of extensively, you don't need to reach to a different platform when you have the need for kind of things on the other end of the spectrum, where you have the need for fast analytical queries that power your dashboards. And so thanks to our multi-level caching support, you can now get fast performance similar to systems that have co-located the storage and compute. And this, once again, kind of avoids the replatforming. So you don't have to reach to a different tool to get this really fast SQL query. You can just use one Presto to do that as well. So we've established that we want one language to avoid replatforming. And so next, I think this single language is sort of a very important direction. The next is what we want to do is have a solid foundation of great performance so that things are blazingly fast across both the batch and interactive. So we just want to make it as fast as possible. Why do we want to make it as fast as possible? By focusing on speed, what you can do on interactive is change the game on what Presto can be used for. So open up even more use cases that you can use Presto instead of some other tool that you have to set up and support and maintain and provide SLOs for. So move Presto into this more really hot path where it's suitable for these really extremely low latency queries. And you would want to do that because it increases productivity. Less time is spent waiting for your data, waiting for a dashboard to show up. You can sort of get your data, move on with your life, and make decisions based off of that data. And then on batch, it just reduces your costs. So typically, you're charged for compute uses for batch workloads. So by using less compute, you end up just paying less. And so, here too, this opens up future use cases. By paying less for your batch workload, you can put more batch workload into production and open up even more data-driven analytical use cases and do more with your data. So focusing on speed and performance kind of helps everything across the spectrum, and once again, it ties into the replatforming problem. You don't want to replatform because the performance isn't great or the speed isn't great. So we want to focus on this basically to further avoid the replatforming and use Presto for more of your workload. And then finally, it's very important that as we think about the single language, that has really great performance, that it's also has this rock solid, reliability. And so, for Presto, reliability is really table stakes. It's used on some of the largest data warehouses in the world. And so it's really important for everyone that it runs as reliably as possible for as many use cases as possible. Then once again, this sort of like ties into broadening the use cases that Presto can support. By supporting it reliably, we know that we can, confidently say that we support, something that wasn't really sort of like a good fit for before. So I have a simplistic diagram that, sort of like illustrates this. So, at a typical data stack at a company, you might have Presto for some dashboards, definitely for your sort of like interactive analytics, probably for your business intelligence. And you may use a really powerful feature of Presto, you may or may not, which is kind of like putting some of your batch workload onto Presto because it's really fast. So you might spin up a cluster which is optimized for batch reliability. And that's really nice because it allows you to experiment and sort of move your online workload basically into batch so that it kind of like gives you these recurring answers and recurring data. But something changes eventually. It could be that like the hash build no longer fits within a broadcast limit. Something changes that it's no longer a good fit and it's not working. And so I think like the one thing that is certain is that your data will change. This will cause sort of like and due to this sort of like certainty of change. Like you basically want to make sure that you're able to scale as your data scales. And so then likewise on the interactive side, there gets to be a point where you want to use a dedicated system that emphasizes data locality to run quickly. And so typically the system will have some sort of merged compute and storage to reduce the data transfer costs. And because it has its own storage, you want to need a special ETL. Which means another pipeline to ingest the data, which means another system to support and to maintain, provide SLOs for, which is just, it's no joke. And so like, I think like in both cases, duration is the problem. Things work happily in Presto when things run fast, but as the duration increases, that's where the cracks start to form. And so, like to manage this, like there's a lot of, things that you can do. Not a whole lot of ideal, solutions, except what I'm going to talk about in a second. But like essentially what we're going into is yet again replatforming. So avoiding the need to replatform when things change, reliability change, or speed changes. So this is what we would really like to see, is sort of like these really low latency hot queries run on Presto. Your really long batch running, really long running batch workload runs on Presto. And so, using Presto on Spark on the large batch side, and then, native acceleration on the interactive side, essentially we're targeting more and more of these spectrum of things that weren't great fits before. And so, concretely, what are we doing to help move this along? And so, like, for the next, half or two, like what are we doing? What are we focused on? And so this isn't a comprehensive list, but like I think some of the things are, number one, doubling down on Presto on Spark. And so this means focusing on some of the remaining gaps that exist between Spark SQL and Presto on Spark, plugging them up, and then deprecating kind of like a previous effort, which kind of like does it in the same way, but not as great. So, focusing on Presto on Spark, really doubling down on this platform, and then, I think the most promising feature is adding native acceleration with Velox to Presto on Spark to really drive down costs significantly, which I think, kind of like has the potential to change the game for, batch workloads. But so these aren't sufficient. Like we're also focusing a lot on the optimizer. So here we're talking, like one important, I think, area of focus is our history-based optimizer that we're working on. Pranjal has made, sort of like great progress on that. Without good optimizations, Presto is not being algorithmically efficient. So, the optimizer space is a very important, space for Presto's future. And so history-based optimizer has the potential for, optimizing Presto on Spark workloads, Presto Classic workloads, and interactive and batch, and really change the game for anything that has somewhat recurring query patterns. Likewise, on the Presto on Spark or Sapphire side, there's adaptive query execution. So the ability to replan in between each stage based on characteristics that have changed on the previous stage of queries, adapting to local data skew, or different stages that might have particular characteristics that can be re-optimized more efficiently. That's also a very important sort of area of focus. Another kind of like area of focus is making sure that Presto uses efficiently resources across all workers as efficiently as possible. And so reducing the variability in CPU between different workers, packing resources efficiently into the workers so that you get the most value from your dollar and the best reliability within Presto clusters is sort of like another area of big focus. And then finally, focusing on native integration to, as I mentioned, really change the game in terms of how much it costs to run Presto, how quickly Presto queries can run, and basically reevaluating like how efficient Presto can be, thanks to native vectorized execution, local optimizations, and really state-of-the-art techniques that are used within the VLOX eval engine. And then finally, focusing on reliability and then focusing on the ability to recover from failure in a way that doesn't require full stage materialization, sort of like doubling down on our ability to run on elastic workload. Elastic workloads is also sort of like a very important area of focus as well. And then finally, the ability to scale and provide more flexible scaling across multiple different hardware classes and types. So that once again we sort of like use hardware, use spot instances to the most of their ability, and sort of like use resources as efficiently as possible where they are available. So I think this is sort of like some of the areas, and like we're going to be talking about more areas in the future within this conference. But next up, I wanted to kind of like talk about the open source community and sort of like, what we're doing and, like how you can help. Because like ultimately this is a community. We rely on everyone in this community to, participate, bring back, and, kind of like help drive it forward. Because like it's not just, certain individuals, it's kind of like all of us helping to drive the community. So, just some quick stats. Over the last 3 years, we've pushed 56 releases, gained 5,000 new stars, over, 1,500 forks were made to kind of like, increase, like for people who are developing on Presto. 400 new committers or contributors made commits to the project, and then 2,000 members have joined the Slack community. So, I'm really proud of the growth and, sort of like the increase in the community, and, just, very excited for, kind of like the future for, even more people to join and, contribute back. One thing I wanted to mention is, sort of like, kind of like the future for contributions. The Presto community now has code owners, and what this is really committership for modules or particular parts of the code base. And so, like we've onboarded, folks from the Parquet community, Hoodie, and also the VLOX communities, and many more are in progress. And so, I think like if you have like a specialized expertise, like a particular area where you have like really particular focus, let's talk and consider code ownership as like a path for getting onboarded into the community and sort of like really giving the ability to contribute back. And so I think like it takes a lot of collaboration to kind of like make this all happen. Like basically, what can we all do to help? And so we have sort of like guidelines for how to collaborate, but mentorship of new contributors, continuing our open governance model, continuing to be responsive and sort of like respectful within our community interactions, and then also the ability to try new things. All of these are kind of like, important for the project. And then, like I also wanted to mention, very quickly, the Presto Conformance program has also been established by the Technical Steering Committee, and we now have guidelines, to approve Presto conformant implementations and sort of like, basically certify, different implementations of Presto that they conform to the same syntax, have the same, sort of like session properties, and can look and feel exactly like you would expect Presto to look and feel. And then finally, we need more committers, and so like these are just sort of like things that you want to do to be integrated into the community. And so I think like a few straightforward steps are walk through the getting started guide, look through the code of conduct, join the Slack group, read through the issues, file issues yourself, follow commit standards for coding guidelines, make sure that your tests pass, contribute code, update documentation, and then very specifically where you can specifically contribute is improving the documentation. We know that there's some areas for improvement there, filing issues for missing functionality, take open issues and offer to work on them, contribute blog posts. If you have sort of like a use case that we don't know about, definitely bring it up, create a blog post that describes it, create new connectors that you have for that you've built that aren't in the open source community. And then finally, really importantly, participate in the TSC meetings, because this is where we discuss kind of like future initiatives, future directions, and so these meetings are kind of like a great way to sort of like participate in Presto's future. Cool. So I think that's me. Just wanted to thank everyone again for like showing up. I think like it's really great to see so many wonderful people from the community here, and really excited for the talks ahead.